Good afternoon. I'm Shannon DeReho. Welcome to today's webinar, which is hosted on behalf of Remote Metering Solutions, the largest privately owned utility network manager in South Africa. Before we start the discussion, please note that the chat and the Q&A are available to you. Please post your questions in the Q&A and your comments in the chat. Both the Q&A and the chat are at the bottom of your screen. Please be aware that we're recording this webinar and we'll send the recording to you when it's available. We're also streaming the webinar live on YouTube and we'll share the link in the chat once it's available. Today we have the pleasure of being guided by Frikkie Malan, the Chief Operating Officer at Remote Metering Solutions. He'll facilitate the discussion with today's panel, which consists of Anelise Keke, an independent consultant across the reward and sustainability disciplines. Ilse Swanepoel, the Chief Operating Officer at Remote Metering Solutions, and Brian Unstead, the Lead Specialist in Sustainability at Liberty 2 Degrees. So I'll hand over now to moderator Frikkie Malan to start the discussion. Over to you, Frikkie.
Thank you, Shannon. And good day, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, From Zero to Net Zero. My name is Frikkie Malan, as Shannon said. I'm honored to guide today's discussion with our panel of esteemed sustainability leaders. First, I just want to thank Shannon and the rest of the Engineering News team for facilitating this webinar. I also want to thank our panelists for their time and above all their expertise and their experience that they will share with us in the next hour or so. The built environment is one of the largest contributors to global energy consumption and emissions. And as we navigate the path to a sustainable future, one thing is clear. Our progress towards this imperative must be measurable, transparent, and accountable. And this is where credible sustainability reporting plays a crucial role. Businesses that embrace structured, standardized reporting frameworks are not just checking a compliance box. They're driving real action, improving financial outcomes, and are positioning themselves for long-term success. Yet, many organizations still struggle with where to begin. They're literally stuck at zero. And others grapple with the complexity of sustainability reporting frameworks, and some organizations are wary of the additional reporting burden. But one fact remains. The demand for credible, standardized, and investment-grade sustainability disclosures is growing. Stakeholders, from investors to tenants, from regulators to customers, want transparency, and they want to see measurable and significant progress. And that's why today's discussion is so important. We're here to unpack the role of IFRS S1 and S2 standards as the foundation for sustainability reporting that is credible, comparable, and financially meaningful. We'll discuss how transparent disclosures can unlock financing opportunities, enhance stakeholder confidence, and accelerate the net zero transition. And most importantly, we'll explore the practical steps that organizations can take to move beyond commitments and drive real, measurable progress towards net zero. To help us navigate these critical topics, we're joined by our panel of industry experts who have been at the forefront of sustainability strategy, reporting, and implementation. So let me introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Anelise Keke. She's a sustainability executive and a consultant with deep expertise in corporate sustainability strategy and regulatory frameworks. She has worked as a chief sustainability officer, and recently she started her own business to advise organizations on aligning with global sustainability reporting standards like IFRS S1 and S2. Next, I want to welcome Brian Unstead, who is the lead specialist in sustainability at Liberty 2 Degrees. Brian was also the immediate past chair of the Green Building Council of South Africa, and he has played a critical role in integrating sustainability at scale within the commercial real estate sector, and he's leading L2D's net zero initiatives. Finally, we also have Ilse Swanepoel. She's a recognized utility management and sustainability expert. Having led sustainability initiatives at a listed property fund and now at RMS, and I might add that Ilse is also a past chair of the Green Building Council of South Africa. Ilse brings a unique perspective on the intersection of energy management, ESG reporting, and strategic decision-making in the built environment. I've thanked all the panelists, but Ilse, I want to thank you again for your participation in today's webinar. Ilse should actually be in bed. She's recovering from, well, she's in the middle of a COVID that struck her over the weekend. And Ilse, thanks for going more than just the extra mile by being here today. So with that said, let's start the discussion and move on from me to our experts. And Brian, I want to direct sort of the first question to you. Now, you've been deeply involved in implementing sustainability projects across a diverse property portfolio at Liberty 2 Degrees. Can you share your experience in scaling these projects and the specific challenges that you've encountered? And also, more importantly, how do you measure and report on the impact of the projects that you have implemented? What tangible outcomes have you seen towards, particularly in terms of L2D's progress towards net zero? The L2D sustainability efforts operate under your impact framework, which is a structured approach to ESG integration. And I'm also, maybe if you can share how this framework helps streamline your reporting and what lessons you've learned about effective disclosure and stakeholder engagement. I think that's about 4 questions. Brian, over to you.
Frick, yeah, thanks. It's quite a mouthful there. And welcome to everyone joining us, industry colleagues, and to the other panelists. Just for clarity, the L2D portfolio is mainly large format retail assets, so we're not completely diversified as much as some of the other funds, the property funds. Our focus is far more on retail. And yeah, I've been involved as part of a broader team within L2D for a number of years on the sustainability initiatives. And it started relatively small, but we had big plans, and that's why we've been driving these net zero targets. So the plans translated into commitments, and that's what we're seeing the fruits of now. So it really is around a lot of planning. So I recall the first solar project that we did, which was commissioned in 2018 at Midlands Mall in Pietermaritzburg. And it required such a rigorous process because there was so much uncertainty and unknowns, and there was a lot of reluctance. And once that was up and running, we had a much better sense of confidence in the systems, in the ability, in the performance of the systems, and it became a lot easier all around. So everything from the procurement process, the project management, the feasibility analysis, and of course getting it over the line in terms of approvals and funding. And now our developments team rolls out a number of these projects, and it's really a well-oiled machine that's able to churn out these solar systems. The challenges encountered, it's really a lot around the unknown. So at the time that we started with our solar ventures, we didn't know who was credible in the market. Suddenly everyone was a solar expert, whether they were accountants, engineers, used car salesmen, everyone was a solar expert and a solar salesperson all of a sudden. And the solar industry was nowhere near as sophisticated and mature as what it is now. So it was about managing the risks from a corporate perspective, and understanding who we were partnering with, and really getting a good feel that we could deliver on the project and that it was a good viable investment. And in some ways, I feel like the water industry is kind of on that cusp at the moment. There's technologies out there, things are happening. There's still a bit of a shake-up in terms of some of the role players in that, and there's a lot of legal and compliance issues that are being navigated, but it is quite exciting. So that I think answers the first question. Your second question related to reporting and measurement, and I'll start with that, of course, by saying that, we have all these wonderful models on what these systems should deliver and can deliver, but we have to track actual performance against it and monitor, and where we need to take interventions to make good on underperformance, that's what we need to do. So I think we've moved a long way away from when we started in the solar sphere around just merely having quarterly panel cleaning as an example, to a much more sophisticated model where we are actually now monitoring the performance of the panels every single day. And when there's a downward trend and it's not weather related, etc., people are asking questions saying, maybe you guys should go and clean the panels. It's only been 6 weeks ago, but we suggest you go and clean the panels now to deliver optimal performance. So that maturity, I think, in-house has also got a lot better over the years. And then in terms of reporting and that, so we do our annual reports externally, whether it be integrated reports, ESG reports, but we're tracking our performance of our utilities and our investments in the likes of solar on a weekly basis, just to make sure that we're on track of what we should be delivering. And then just to list 2 examples on the energy side of the business. Solar really has been a key component of our move towards renewables. The returns have been good, and we are completing the last of our major solar projects at the moment, which will be complete by around August, September this year. And that'll take us up to 17 megawatts of solar, which will account for around 20% of our total energy requirements. So it's scaled up over a number of years, and now it's become quite significant. And then in terms of another initiative, a significant initiative that we've been involved in, is the replacement of our air conditioning equipment from water-cooled systems to air-cooled systems. And that'll significantly reduce our water consumption, potable water consumption, by around 15 to 20%. So again, that's quite a significant intervention that's making a big difference. And then lastly, your third question, I think, was, or fourth question, was around transparency, accountability. So I think the commitment of landlords and from our perspective, L2D, is to provide what's relevant to stakeholders. So we are now a business line within the Standard Bank Group. We were previously listed as a separate entity until the end of 2023, and now fully aligned and part of the Standard Bank Group. And so the reporting requirements will now be even further aligned to Standard Bank's reporting strategy.
Sure, thanks, Brian. I'm going to move on for the sake of time to Anelise. I've actually got a question I want to ask you, but let's leave that for the Q&A. Anelise, you've had the unique experience of seeing sustainability from 2 perspectives. First, as I've mentioned, you've been a sustainability executive in a listed property fund, and now you're a consultant guiding organizations at different stages of their sustainability journeys. So, first question I have, based on this experience, what would you say are the biggest hurdles that organizations face when they begin their sustainability journey, particularly those looking to set some kind of a, let's say, net zero target? Then
Thanks.
also,
Of course.
I've got one more for you. I'm not going to give you 4 like I did to Brian. Sorry, Brian. More importantly, what practical steps can companies take to move from some kind of commitment to actual meaningful action, ensuring that they align their sustainability efforts with their business strategy, compliance, and financing goals?
Thanks so much, Frikkie, and thank you to my esteemed panelists for having me, and good afternoon to the audience. Frikkie, I think what's interesting is that there are quite a few companies that are only starting their sustainability journeys this year. And what you tend to find is they don't know what they don't know, if that makes sense. But what you often find is they're under pressure from one or more semi-external or external stakeholder groups to fast track their sustainability strategy. So what I frequently hear is the board of directors told me I have to do this, so here we all are. Or you hear, listen, we need to attract new sources of capital. or we're trying to, attract developmental finance, and so here we all are. Or you hear, we're trying to get tenants, and tenants are starting to make some noises and starting to make real demands of us from a sustainability perspective. So here we are. So you tend to find that is the real impetus behind the discussion. The biggest challenge, I think, is the knowledge gap. Because they're under pressure from these external groups, they tend to overcommit. So they're overpromising, and then unfortunately they tend to underdeliver. So more than once, for example, I've seen companies say, "Oh, we've got this very ambitious net zero target," and then I say, "Okay, but have you calculated your carbon footprint before?" And then yeah, oh wait, what's that? Is it nice? So you have that problem where a lot of people are under pressure to put the cart before the horse, and also because I think a lot of companies don't want to fall behind their peers, or don't want to be seen to be falling behind their peers. So the first order of business, I think, is to just understand for yourself as a company, why are you doing this? Because if you're not clear as to the business rationale for going down this path, you will struggle to get buy-in, certainly internally, because, realistically, people don't want to be compelled to all of a sudden start doing activities that are outside of the normal course and scope of unless you give them a compelling reason as to why, in the long term, this is in the business's best interests. So explaining that problem statement, and what it is you're trying to solve for, and then getting to solution mode, I think is absolutely critical. And when setting a net zero target or a net zero journey, I always say you can peek over the fence and look at what your peers are doing, but you shouldn't just copy and paste what your peers are doing. So it's also about clearly defining what is net zero in your world. What is you're trying to achieve, and once again, what is the business rationale behind your net zero target? Because it can't just be my tenant told me to do it, or XYZ investor told me to do it, and I need that 500 million, so we're just going to do this now. I think in terms of your second question, in terms of the practical steps, the first thing is to actually map out your business model and how your stakeholders fit into that business model, and how it then feeds into your short, medium, and long-term strategy. And it might sound a bit trite, but what you find with very siloed organizations, where different departments do their own thing, they don't necessarily speak to each other in any meaningful way, shape, or form, it actually becomes quite an exercise to actually map out what the complete business model is across the organization. Because if you don't do that, you can't move to the point where you actually start setting a strategy that speaks to an ESG strategy, rather, that speaks to the company's trajectory in the short, medium, and long term. And a practical example of where this is played out, you find some companies will task a specific department to oversee sustainability. And that department, because people do what they know, they just focus on what sustainability looks like insofar as their department is concerned, as opposed to looking across the business, including looking at the governance aspects, so looking at the shared services and the extent to which they need to incorporate sustainability. So you tend to find that siloed thinking does creep in, and it's important for any company starting this journey to understand that for a sustainability strategy to hold any water, you really need to break down silos, and you need to break them down quite aggressively, in order to make sure that your strategy actually properly identifies all of the material aspects to your strategy. And I know I've been long-winded, but just give me one more minute. I think the last thing I want to add is you need to also assess the aspects of sustainability that are material to your business. And once again, not just copying and pasting whatever your peers are doing at the time. So if your business, for example, only consists of existing buildings, you're not developing at any real degree, and your assets are not located in protected areas, from a conservation perspective, it probably doesn't make sense for you to have the most stretching net positive biodiversity target in the market, because your impact of biodiversity on your organization and your organization's impact on biodiversity is fairly minimal. So I think it's about just applying that common sense principle to say, focus your resources, especially when they are limited, on the aspects of sustainability that are really going to make an impact on your business. Thanks, Fricky.
Thank you, Anelise. You mentioned sort of this breaking down of silos, and I think it's sort of really keen to pose my next question to Ilse, because she's one of the few professionals in the industry that she has extensive expertise in sort of both utility management and sustainability, that breaking down of silos, I guess. And these two fields are becoming increasingly interlinked. And data is playing a pivotal role in both utility management and sustainability. So Ilse, having said that, with that sort of convergence of utility management and sustainability, how do you see the relationship between energy and water efficiency, cost savings and sustainability reporting evolving in the near future? And second question, do you believe that companies with credible sustainability disclosures and demonstrable utility cost savings will have a competitive advantage in attracting top-tier tenants and investors?
Okay, thank you. It's a great question. Thank you for having me today as well as one of the panelists, and good afternoon to everybody out there that's listening to us today. Fricky, I think you've hit the nail on the head there by touching on something that's really important, because we're definitely seeing that. We're seeing that very strong convergence between utility management and sustainability. And I believe it's actually a convergence that's going to accelerate rapidly over the next few years, especially in the real estate and built environment sectors. And maybe if I can start off by giving some context. Initially, utility management's primary role was to measure consumption and make sure that we accurately bill and recover from our tenants, often serving as a profit center, essentially, to landlords rather than a tool for promoting operational efficiencies. But I think this perspective we've seen shifting effectively so fast that almost the market is struggling to keep up. So it's becoming all about the data. It's becoming all about the efficiency, and that need to have measurable energy consumption, measurable water consumption, to manage cost, to ensure reliability is becoming critical, I think, for the majority of property owners out there. But where things are evolving now, I think, is that utility data is even no longer just an operational tool. It's becoming strategic. And I think especially companies and organizations that start to take their ESG and sustainability commitments seriously, we will continue to see this trend. I mean, more and more, we're seeing the need from clients and from property owners for a single source of truth data repository, if I can call it that. Because effectively, the same data you need to manage your utilities effectively is often exactly the same data that you need to report on carbon emissions, track your target to your progress towards your net zero target, and ultimately demonstrate sustainability performance to investors, to tenants, to regulators. So in fact, I'd actually argue that without accurate and granular utility data, it's almost impossible to do credible sustainability reporting. And I think maybe a practical example of this would just be, and Lisa's touched on the siloed approach as well, but I think, the teams are often frustrated because the data lives in a different silo to where a lot of the action is taking place within these property companies as well. So a very simplified practical example is, let's say we've got a property owner that wants to do a net zero certification on carbon in one of their buildings. That certification relies on the availability of verified and accurate energy consumption data. And that data is typically drawn from utility management systems and smart meters and sub-meters and building management systems. So if that data isn't accurate or isn't available in the right format, the entire certification process sometimes just stalls. And I think it goes beyond certification as well. There's a real commercial incentive here as well. I think blue chip tenants and institutional investors are increasingly demanding transparency on their environmental performance of the assets they lease or invest in. And I've seen firsthand how landlords with credible data demonstrating lower cost of utilities, lower emissions intensity, are able to command higher tenant demand and negotiate better financing terms. These are real financial outcomes, not theoretical benefits. I think in terms of how I see this convergence play out in the short term, I think there's probably 3 key trends to watch. I think the first one is utility management as a sustainability enabler. In my view, utility management teams will increasingly be seen as critical to achieve sustainability targets. I think traditionally these teams have operated very much in the background, but they're now moving to the strategic spotlight. Their ability to measure, to monitor, and to drive reduction in consumption directly impacts emissions reporting, cost savings, and even tenant engagement. Traditionally, their role was very reactive. It was almost a once in a month kind of thing. But the pressure is mounting, and these teams need to start driving true proactive management of consumption to at least achieve operational efficiency as a very first step towards net zero buildings. I think that's a key trend to watch. I think integrated data platforms is probably my second point here. We're already seeing a lot of companies out there that are moving towards integrated platforms that bring together utility data, emissions data, ESG metrics into one dashboard. And these platforms are not only there to support real-time operational decision making, they're there to help that operational decision making. Let me put it a different way. It's platforms that can help identify facilities managers if they have abnormal water consumption or a spike in consumption that they need to respond to. But it also enables companies to automate the data that they require for sustainability reporting and various sorts of frameworks like IFRS S1 and 2. And if we're able to deliver platforms like this to the market, this means a less manual work, fewer errors, more confidence in the numbers that's being disclosed to stakeholders. So I think with the impending implementation of reporting standards like IFRS S1 and S2, there's also a heightened need for the alignment between utility data and financial reporting. And I think companies are increasingly seeking specialist guidance to ensure that their consumption data, their emission records, their financials are synchronized, which is essential to the accurate disclosure of sustainability metrics. And I think then lastly, and probably most importantly for me, is credible disclosure of utility performance. That's becoming a real competitive differentiator. Tenants, especially large corporates with their own net zero goals, I think are looking for properties that help them achieve those goals. And if landlords can show with confidence that their buildings use less energy, emits less carbon, and the costs are less to operate, there's a major advantage. It's not just about being green, it's about being able to prove it with the data. And I think independent data insurance is becoming a critical requirement. More companies now require that their sustainability data be independently verified, particularly as this data is directly impacting their ability to secure ESG or sustainability linked financing arrangement. And this trend just underscores the growing importance of data integrity in environmental reporting. So yes, to your point, Frikkie, I think landlords that can provide this level of credible disclosure are in a stronger position to attract and retain ESG conscious tenants. They're better positioned to access green financing opportunities. And they're also in the position to start future-proofing their assets against regulatory impacts. So I think this convergence, to wrap up, between utility and management and sustainability isn't just inevitable, it's strategic. It's moving from a reactive to a proactive value creation strategy, and using data as the bridge between those two worlds. So companies, I think, that will embrace the shift will not only meet their sustainability goals, but they will position themselves as leaders in a highly competitive and increasingly regulated market as well.
Thanks, Ilse. And you know what went through my mind as you were answering the question, when we talked about convergence, we touched on utility and sustainability. But I think you also talked about sort of the operational impact, and Brian certainly also referred to using data to, let's say, optimize the performance of these sustainability-related assets, renewable plants in your portfolio, Brian, and how important that is. And again, data drives that decisions. The example that you gave around panel cleaning, that decision was triggered by having the right information and the right data. At some point, I think we need to start also to bring IFRS S1 and S2 into the conversation. And Anelise, I'm going to ask you the next question. So there's already a lot of sustainability, ESG frameworks, ratings, indices, and now we have seen the rise of IFRS S1 and S2, and it's on the horizon and it's imminent. So how do IFRS S1 and S2 fit into the picture? That's already quite complicated. I guess some companies could view them as an added reporting burden. Other companies maybe see them as an opportunity, them being S1 and S2, for greater transparency and for maybe access to financing. So here's the question. In your view, how do IFRS S1 and S2 complement existing reporting frameworks? And what value do they bring to the business? And then could these standards in some way accelerate the transition from zero to net zero by making the reporting of sustainability performance more transparent, comparable, and probably, most importantly, investment friendly?
Thanks, Frikkie. And I think right at the outset, it's probably a good idea for me to explain to some of our audience members what IFRS S1 and S2 are, because I think the jargon in the sustainability space tends to fly thick and fast. So let's start right at the beginning. So essentially, IFRS is the organization that issues global accounting standards. Okay. IFRS typically has focused on financial reporting. However, in 2023, they released 2 sets of standards on the reporting of sustainability-related financial information. And I'm going to explain what that is. But basically, they released 2 documents. One of them is called IFRS S1, which relates to general requirements for the disclosure of sustainability-related financial information, and IFRS S2, which focuses on climate-related disclosures. And the point of both of these standards is to set out the short, medium, and long-term sustainability-related risks and opportunities that are relevant to primary users of financial statements, jargon aside, that's investors and funders. And ultimately, it is aimed at shedding light on the impact of these risks and opportunities on the financial prospects of the company. So that's the mouthful, but that's essentially what they're trying to achieve. So first of all, let's break down what that means. You are focusing it on investors and funders. You'll notice how that doesn't include communities, it doesn't include customers, it doesn't include suppliers, I could go on. And secondly, it is focusing on those risks and opportunities. Fricky, what you'll typically find is companies have got, even the more developed listed funds, they've got very developed risk frameworks, but their risk frameworks tend to be very scant when it comes to talking about opportunities. And the IFRS standards want you to do both. So you've got to talk about your risks and opportunities in the short, medium, and long term. So it is up to the company to actually define in their context what is short, medium, and long term, bearing in mind in the real estate context, real estate is a long-term asset class, yes? So it would be strange to have a long-term period that's like 5 years. I mean, and so those are kind of the key elements you need to be aware of when you're talking about the IFRS standards. Now, you asked me, what about all of the frameworks and the indices and this and that and the third? Generally speaking, the IFRS standards are not meant to replace them. And, there's a lot of hype around the standards in the market. People are behaving like they were handed down by Moses, like the 10 Commandments straight from Mount Sinai. And it's like, not necessarily. The point of the standards is to set a baseline. Because up until this point, one of the key criticisms from local and global investors is they're not able to compare apples with apples, because company A is using the Global Reporting Initiative standards, right, which focus on impact materiality, the impact of the business on its external environment. Then you have company B that's using its own very obscure standard or index. And as a result, you're not comparing apples with apples. You don't know which companies are actually pulling ahead from a sustainability perspective versus the ones that are perhaps laggards. So the point of the IFRS standard is to say, make sure if you want to use those additional frameworks and indices and so forth, feel free to do so, but the IFRS standards are the baseline of your reporting. They're not compulsory in South Africa yet. Quite a number of countries have coded them into legislation, including Nigeria, and I think Kenya as well more recently. I do think in the next 2 years, the South African legislation will probably make IFRS compulsory. Why I'm saying that is the CIPC, Companies and Intellectual Property Commission, has actually allowed companies to start tagging in their annual reporting back to SIPC. Companies can actually tag their sustainability-related risks and opportunities. And that, to me, sent a message to the market that, listen, we're moving towards full regulation, but for now, everything is voluntary. So generally, what you also find is that those same frameworks that I mentioned, where companies can choose to continue using them, provided they're using IFRS as the baseline, you find that a lot of those indices are actually also aligning themselves more and more to IFRS. I think a month ago, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which regulates carbon footprints and how to calculate your carbon footprint, they've just come out with a new supplement on how to align your greenhouse gas reporting to your IFRS reporting. So that kind of shows you that even the tried and tested frameworks that have been around for 10 years plus in this are aligning to IFRS. And just in terms of, the benefits thereof, it gives your organization an opportunity to explain to your investors and your funders on your own terms that you understand your sustainability-related risks and opportunities. You understand the impact that they could potentially have on the business, and that the management team and the board have the matter in hand. And you'll notice how it goes beyond, obviously metrics and targets, will be heavily influenced by utility data, which Ilse has explained at length. But it also talks about governance, Fricky. It talks about who in this organization is responsible for this thing. Who sees it? Who makes sure that there are targets? Who makes sure that those targets are credible? How often are they being measured? So I think there are a lot of benefits in terms of getting investor confidence that as they refinance your assets or as they inject you with new capital, you are actually able to deploy that capital in a way that minimizes your risks and maximizes your opportunities. And then lastly, your question on accelerating zero to net zero. I think the fact that the IFRS standards focus on your short, medium, and long-term journey compels you to explain what the journey is going to be between point A, being the 18th of March 2025, and that 2050 goal you've set for your existing assets. You can't just set this goal in a bit of a vacuum and then just hope that your investors take it on faith that you'll make it there safe and sound. You actually need to map out how exactly you're going to implement that. And it gives you an opportunity then to actually map out some of those practical implementation measures that your organization has taken as part of that journey, and also forcing you to make your commitments more credible, because now you have to actually clearly define your commitment. So when we're saying net zero, is it net zero carbon? Is it net zero water? Is this a time-bound target? What are your key challenges? How are you going to overcome them? As opposed to, setting a net zero target that is little more than a catchy slogan. You really have to explain how it actually serves your IFRS-related sustainability risks and opportunities that are going to impact the financial prospects of the company in the medium to long term. So I know that sounded very lawyery, but I hope that sufficed.
Thank you, Anelise. So Brian, I'm going to ask you the next question, and it's sort of, I'm coming from the angle of Liberty 2 Degrees, certainly far beyond zero and well on your way to net zero for a number of years. So you've had to report more than once on your progress. So if you can make it a little bit practical, I guess, and if you can share some of the reporting practices that some of the audience and other organizations can learn from. Maybe it implies that, sharing learning means there's maybe some mistakes made in the journey. You don't have to mention that. But yeah, you've come a long way, Brian. What can you share about your lessons learned in terms of how you disclosed progress?
Thanks, Frikkie. I think you've dropped from 4 questions to 3 this time, so thanks. So the Liberty 2 Degrees framework is under something called Impact, and that covers both environmental sustainability and the social initiatives that affect the communities that we operate in. We report on a combination of qualitative and quantitative disclosures in that. We need to provide the numbers and where we are, where we targeting to get to, and how we're going to get there, and in what time frame we're going to get there. And a key component to that is obviously telling the story of what we're doing, what we're planning, and why we're busy doing that as part of that strategy. So today we're quite proud. We've got the first portfolio-wide net zero waste certifications as of beginning of last year, and we've made some really good progress in terms of net zero water and net zero carbon. And I don't make light of it. It comes with a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of capital commitments. In terms of the reporting side, yes, we the first ESG report that we did, I think it was 4 years ago, and we were a separately listed entity as Liberty 2 Degrees. And the first one in particular is an absolutely huge task. I mean, the assembly of data, the verification, that kind of process, setting it up, getting all of the initiatives that we're busy with documented and so on, and it gets a little bit easier. So once you've got the template set up and you can really track and use that as the baseline, and it does become quite a lot easier after the first one. And then having the data externally audited, I think is quite a key component of the process from a level of comfort to stakeholders. And we also have provided commitments in terms of capital spend on what we're doing as a business to try and get there. And these commitments are big. I mean, in terms of property assets, they're expensive assets, and to move the needle, it takes a lot of money, and they're big systems. So they take tens, if not hundreds of millions to make a difference. And you've got to have that commitment behind you. So in terms of reporting practices, just the last component of my response on this. So they take a lot of time and effort and resources, and it's got to be backed. So I think that the mention was made earlier about, box ticking, or you can't make light of these commitments to make them meaningful. You've really got to have everything behind you, the finances, the people, the board commitment, management commitment. You've got to rally the operational side of the staff and the teams, and property management, facilities management. Everything's got to be aligned to make a difference. And then, the word we've heard a lot today, data, data, data. It's and the single source of the truth. It's not quite as easy as was what one would think, even though we're in 2025. There's still a lot of Excel spreadsheets that are bandied about as a sense of comfort. We've got all these great reporting tools and graphs and all sorts of things, but it's absolutely critical to this process. I mean, and also interested to hear that alignment, I think, that Ilse was talking about, between utilities, facilities, as well as the sustainability and the sustainability reporting side of the business. That convergence is certainly happening very, very rapidly and absolutely critical. I mean, just working absolutely hand in glove to make sure that you've got a handle on these numbers, and again, to make sure that the systems are performing as well as they should be, and you don't find out 3 months, 6 months later that they're not performing as well as they need to. You've got to take immediate interventions to make sure that you're back on track. So that data is absolutely key to this journey.
Sure, thank you, Brian. Ilse, last one for you. We heard a lot today about sort of the benefits of credible sustainability disclosure. We heard success stories. We heard about progress towards net zero that's made by the likes of Liberty 2 Degrees. What about companies that are not taking any action? For businesses that, for whatever reason, choose to remain on the sidelines, what are the biggest risks of doing nothing, whether that's from a regulatory, financial, even reputational perspective? And again, if you had to project a bit into the future, what would that future look like for companies that delay their sustainability action? How might things like investor expectations, market dynamics, and regulatory changes affect them? What's your view on that?
Yeah, Frikkie, a fantastic question, a critical one, I think, as well, but not an easy one. So, look, I think we're at a point where inaction on sustainability is it's not just a missed opportunity, it's a material risk. Many companies are beginning to understand that the benefits of credible sustainability disclosure is there, but what we need to really confront are the consequences of doing nothing, as you say, especially in the built environment sector. So, I mean, if I can potentially just start with a term, it's one of these terms that's thrown around, is the term a stranded asset. So in simple terms, I mean, a stranded asset is something that loses its value before the end of its expected life. Often because it can no longer be used or sold or leveraged the way it was leveraged before. And in real estate, I think this could be a building that becomes too energy inefficient, too carbon intensive, too costly to upgrade. And as a result, tenants just won't lease it, investors won't fund it, and then insurers might begin to pull back on it as well. And I think global markets show us that we are starting to see real world examples here. Where properties that can't meet certain energy performance standards or carbon regulations are facing very steep retrofit costs very serious financial penalties and reduced valuations. And these legislations are being released on an almost weekly basis in the Americas, Canada, as well as in Europe. And I think as more cities and countries adopt net zero building codes, and as lenders and asset managers apply stricter ESG criteria, the risk of buildings becoming stranded assets is very, very real in the life of a property owner. So companies that are not actively measuring and managing and reporting on the utility data, the energy, water, waste, emissions data, they don't know where they stand. And I think Anelise said it well, is, they don't know what they don't know. And they won't be able to identify these risks early enough, and they certainly won't be prepared to mitigate them before there's real loss in asset value potentially. So yes, I mean, this is where credible data and sustainability disclosure becomes essential, not just for ESG reporting, but for protecting asset value. So yeah, you touched on a couple of those regulatory risks. Absolutely, buildings that don't comply with future emission caps, energy codes, might face penalties from carbon taxes, other financial penalties. I mean, municipalities in South Africa, particularly those aligned with the C40s, are moving towards net zero standards for both new buildings as well as existing buildings. And if your asset doesn't comply, again, you may face hefty costs to retrofit. So, even worse, they may become unlettable. Financially, absolutely. These stranded assets that lose value will affect balance sheets, will affect your borrowing power, your ability to attract investors. So we're seeing green finance options like sustainability-linked loans becoming more widespread, but they require, again, credible standardized reporting. So I think it's a matter of no data, no deal. So, there's other material market risks as well. Let's talk about tenants, especially the blue chip corporate tenants with their own ESG ambitions and mandates. I think these tenants won't lease spaces in buildings that aren't aligned with their sustainability and efficiency benchmarks. And if you can't provide the credible data, showing them that the consumption in these buildings are lower, that emissions are lower, you're definitely at a disadvantage in attracting premium tenants to your buildings and again, impacting bottom line. I think on an operational risk point of view, buildings that are not managed sustainably tend to become increasingly inefficient and expensive to operate. So as utility costs rise, especially with the volatility of energy and water supply in South Africa, inefficient buildings become financial liabilities very quickly, pushing them further towards the stranded asset status. So I think, to wrap up on the doom and gloom side, doing nothing and doing nothing is not a neutral position anymore. It's a high risk position. Whether through regulatory penalties, declining asset values, or loss in market relevance, organizations that fail to act are heading toward increased exposure and decreased competitiveness. But I think it's important to also realize that there's a big however here. I think the pathway to sustainability is filled with actionable steps that property owners can undertake immediately. Loved Anelise's reference to, from today. I mean, for example, I'm a very keen advocate of the Green Building Council's Energy and Water Performance tool, which is a tool that's available freely and you can download and obtain that from their website. Just as a first step to at least gain an understanding of your portfolio or of your building's emission sources and where they are performing relatively to the market, so that you have some sight of their sustainability profiles and can start to action on that. Another thing that I think is critical for property owners to understand is that thoughtful consideration of building design during renovations is something that can significantly enhance your energy efficiency also long term when we think net zero. It's not always about the PV plant or the lighting changes and the HVAC upgrades. It's around making design improvements in as far as it's practically possible when you do renovations, that it's not only something that's considered as part of a new build. So yeah, I think in conclusion, while the risks of inaction is really significant, they're far outweighed by the benefits of proactive engagement in sustainability practices. So I think starting with mapping out comprehensive data systems, aligning with global reporting frameworks, using tools that's out there in the market that's easily digestible, I think is a good very first step for property owners. So yeah, I think the good news is that credible sustainability disclosure rooted in accurate utility data can prevent assets from becoming stranded. And it enables proactive planning, access to green financing, competitive position in the market. So yeah, I'm sounding like a broken record, but starting with robust data systems and aligning with these standards is not just best practice, it's future proofing at the end of the day.
Frikkie, you're on mute, I think.
I think Frikkie's on mute. Yeah.
I am on mute. Thank you for that. We had to use those words at least once. Thank you to the panelists. You've shared a wealth of information. Before we go to Q&A, and I'm looking at the time, we are almost at the end of the hour. If you can maybe just wrap up with top 3 insights, could be tips, pitfalls, whatever. I mean, a lot was said. And Brian, I'm not going to start with you with a wrap up because I've thrown some questions at you. Let's start, Ilse. Can I ask you to go first, and then Anelise, and then Brian. 3 tips, 3 takeaways, and then we can go to Q&A.
Yeah, I'll try and be very brief, Frikkie. In the interest of time, I think, strong leadership commitment is something that is, always spoken about. But I think achieving these things comes from not only strategic vision, but strong buy-in from senior leadership, from actually leadership on all levels within a company. I think Anelise has spoken about it very nicely around this kind of sustainability often just becomes one department or one team's kind of problem, and they need to deal with it. But I think strong leadership commitment and strong alignment within a company as to the core objectives for their business that they want to achieve in terms of this, allocating the right resources, knowing where they want to go, is critical. I think another key takeaway for me is, and I think it's come from what Brian has said, other than me just harping on about data, is that data-driven decision-making is becoming paramount to the process. And I think then the last step for me is, it's don't underestimate the statements and the commitments you made. I think Anelise to an extent also spoke about this. Spend the time before you make the commitment. Spend the time with experts in the industry. Partner with guys that have good knowledge about this and understand the lay of the land before you just dive into the pool and get yourself in all sorts of trouble.
Thanks, Ilse. Anelise?
Thanks, Frikkie. I think my top 3 would be, number 1, guys, start at the beginning. I think there are honestly companies that honestly believe that they can go from 0 ESG strategy to full IFRS reporting in the space of 12 months. It's not going to work that way. Start at the beginning and start small. And as Ilse and Brian have said very eloquently, start with your data. If your data is soft or your internal controls are not there, everything you say effectively can be called into question at some point down the line. The second one, just touching on what I said earlier, is that get buy-in for what it is you're trying to do. I've seen a lot of young people, especially, who are often co-opted into the space, right? So they're not trained sustainability specialists, but they're from a completely different discipline altogether. And then you find that they don't have the buy-in. So I think, in my view, change management is a bit of a lost art. But in sustainability, change management is absolutely essential. Otherwise, you have what I've also seen, where your sustainability strategy sits right at the top of the pyramid. It's a broad pet project, and it's not filtered down at all, because that change management element was simply neglected. And the last one is, consult often and consult widely. Speak to your peers, speak to the specialists, as Ilse has said, speak to your tenants, speak to the banks. For another client recently, I've actually been speaking to senior heads of corporate and investment banking at the different banks. And they are deeply concerned about ESG adoption levels, and they are deeply concerned about EPC compliance. And so now you're almost back to what Ilse said about stranding asset risk. People are holding on to these assets that do not meet this changing market requirement. And one day they're going to apply for refinancing and be told and be turned away at the door to say, no, this asset is a brown asset. I need to report a credible emissions reduction in terms of my financed emissions, and your asset doesn't help me serve that purpose. You show yourself out. So I think we really need to start consulting more widely to understand within our ecosystems what it is our customers and what it is our funders and our investors actually want when it comes to sustainability, and to what extent can we actually meet those requirements. Thanks, Fricky.
Thank you, Anelise. Brian, your three insights.
Very, very briefly, because I know we're running out of time. I think there's quite a lot of overlap with Anelise and what Ilse have responded to already. I think, it's got to become embedded in the business. It's got to become a way of doing business. It can't be a bolt-on. It just doesn't work in a business when sustainability is seen as an outside thing that's trying to infiltrate. And then, timing wise, the process is quite slow, so there needs to be a realistic targets that are set, and a gap analysis, starting, an honest assessment of where you are, where you're likely to get to, how much you're prepared to commit financially, resources, etc., and doing that gap analysis. And then just there's a commitment. There's got to be a way of the sustainability team members telling better stories, getting everyone along for the journey. Why you're doing it, what the benefits are, and not this kind of approach, just telling people this is what you have to do. It's really got to get buy-in from everybody, starting with the C-suite, and then getting everyone along for the journey, I think is key. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Anelise, and thank you, Ilse. Let's go to some questions. I see my finger posted a question, which I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. I think the question relates to sort of, if you had to spend money and you had to choose between, let's say, getting some kind of sustainability certification for a building versus spending the money to actually drive down consumption and having that verified by a third party. Is there a business case for that certification that you can maybe trade off against the maybe more tangible ROI of reducing consumption with some intervention? How would you spend the money? I don't know who wants to jump into that one.
Fricky, if I may, I'll give it a stab very quickly. I think it depends ultimately on what it is you're trying to achieve. So the actual interventions to actually improve the environmental performance of the building, in my view, should always take precedence. But once again, it depends on your strategy. If your strategy is to have an independent, verifiable kind of certification of your building in order to qualify for a use of proceeds related green bond. So for example, you're actually raising a bond in the market and you're going to use the proceeds of said bond to fund green assets, you need a certification. Because ultimately the market is, especially when it comes to handling their money, they're not just going to take your word for it. But similarly, I think certifications help you in establishing a portfolio-wide baseline for how far your portfolio is from reaching those loftier goals that we've been talking about throughout the discussion. So, it's just important to understand what it is you're going to use the certification for, and ultimately not neglecting those key interventions that are actually going to be required to improve the overall environmental performance of your building. Thanks.
Thanks, Anelise. Does anybody else maybe want to add to that?
Very similar view. It depends why you're doing it. But you'll
Yeah.
probably find that your costs of certification are a fraction of what your interventions and that would be. But yeah, it all depends on your strategy and why you're doing it.
Thanks, Brian. Another question from Peter is asking, how would you convince a reluctant property owner to pursue energy management and reporting of the efficiency of your portfolio if they're starting from a position where they sort of box tickers? How do you get them to invest, I guess is the word, and become invested in taking meaningful action?
I'm so tempted to answer, but I think Brian might be the better one to answer, because I almost want to piggyback off something
No,
that
go ahead,
Brian
Ilse.
said. I think Brian mentioned something which sparked with me. He mentioned the word storytelling, and I think this is something that we lack in businesses at the moment. Is if you're able to get a chance to do a proof of concept, and I think Brian, and I think that's why you're probably better positioned from an LTD 2D point of view, with practical experience on how you guys were able to achieve net zero waste. It's not, oh, we're going to spend all this money and achieve net zero waste one day, and there you go, and you've got all the monies on the table. I think we need to become better at storytelling, and by storytelling I mean proper case studies backed by the right data, the right financials to support it. Because I think, to respond to that question, it becomes a simple ROI thing in many instances. Now, not everything is necessarily ROI driven at the end of the day when we talk sustainability, but I think specifically to Peter's question, energy management in this country is one of those absolute no-brainers where, there's definitely a financial case to be made. And I think if one can do that linked to a case study with proper back data, I don't see why you won't sway a property owner to move away from a box ticking exercise thinking.
Thanks, Ilse. I've got a question for Brian. So we talked about energy efficiency now, and energy management, and the business case there, and it certainly is there. But Brian, I guess with, let's call it energy efficiency, specifically, there's sort of limited progress you can make towards net zero. You can't get to net zero with efficiency only. So there's sort of I guess maybe a mix of interventions between efficiency, renewables, and maybe some other things. What's your take on sort of a journey that sort of, where do you start? Efficiency first, renewables first, in combination? Just, I know it's a very broad question, but sort of generically, how would you unpack that?
I would run all of them concurrently. I mean, the efficiencies and that can happen, and there's a lot of no cost and low cost interventions that you can take in optimizing temperatures of your malls. And when you start up your systems and that kind of stuff, on-site renewables has become an absolute no-brainer with the pricing of energy and that. And as I said earlier, it's a very advanced and sophisticated industry. We're also looking at wheeling at scale. So in the instance of Sandton City and Nelson Mandela Square in Johannesburg, we've got a direct Eskom feed. So we're at advanced contractual stages in terms of wheeling. And yeah, it's a combination of driving down consumption as much as you can, both from a landlord's perspective as well as from a tenant's perspective, and getting the tenants to try and reduce their bills and align with your net zero targets. And then, yeah, changing that supply, that mix of supply has to happen significantly.
Thank you, Brian. There's a few more questions. It's almost, see, Michelle, it's more of a statement than a question, I guess. And Anelise, I see you are responding to that statement. Maybe we can take one more. It's already 6 minutes past 3. Let's see this question here from Andile. Ilse, it's directed to you. How do you ensure data reliability and integrity where unreliable data would compromise the reporting aspects? It's about data quality and integrity.
Yeah, I think Andile, a fantastic question, and I think that's it's a very real world example. And I think there's probably not a property owner out there in terms of ESG reporting that has not struggled with this. I think the reality of the situation is that data, you will have instances where data will not always be, let's call it 100% accurate. And then also Brian touched on this, data is scattered between different sources. I think, if we practically take something like metering information, so, if you do not have bulk check metering installed at a building, you're relying on a council bill for data, that data may not be accurate. The trick here, I think, is to have a proper defined process in place as to how that data will be treated once any corrections to the data has to be made. Okay. And I think that defined process is really key. And I think a lot of property owners are reporting and then they discover issues with reports and they're being left with egg on the face at the end of the day because we didn't disclose the data accurately. Although if we work around an assumption of where things can go wrong and how we will treat them when they go wrong, I think a framework like that, which is methodically, and I can't stress this enough, methodically documented in a way that would make sense to parties and stakeholders. I mean, it is something we can overcome. The biggest thing here is I think that people are leaving the data interrogation for when you get to the reporting deadline. And I think that's probably the biggest driver of mistakes within data validation and data integrity, although there might still be mistakes that creep in, but 99% of the mistakes you will avoid when you start to look at your reporting on a regular interval with the right kind of benchmarking in place, the right kind of validation tools provided through platforms like these integrated data platforms that we spoke about. So I think that's probably the two ways that I'll kind of encourage you to overcome that problem. Yeah.
Thank you, Ilse. So when the Creamer Media team briefed us on the session, they said it's okay if we go over time, which we've done. They also said that sort of getting to 10 past the hour is going to stretch the limits of most people's availability. So with that in mind, I want to wrap up the session. I want to thank the panelists again. There's meeting expectations and then there's exceeding expectations. You've certainly exceeded my expectations of the session. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise and doing it in the way that you did it. Thank you for everybody who attended. I know you're all busy taking our times to attend the session. We certainly enjoyed it. And then thank you again to the Creamer Media team, my own marketing team for setting this up. Thank you very much. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks
so much.
Brian.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as we wrap up, I just want to say thank you also to everyone for joining us. Thank you to our moderator, Frikkie Malan, and our guest speakers, Anelise Keke, Ilse Swanepoel, and Brian Unstead for an engaging panel discussion. As Frikkie said, there was a lot of information that was shared, and I think everybody enjoyed the discussion. If you have any further questions or would like to continue the conversation, you can feel free to reach out to us via email at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. And if you'd like RMS to assist you and your businesses in better utility management to create a worry-free utilities future, you can visit their website at www.remotemetering.net. And with that, I'd like to bid you all farewell. Thank you so much for your time, and goodbye.